My name is Naomi Carter. I'm 27 years old, and the night my boyfriend said, maybe we're better off as friends, he already had a bag packed by the door. That was the part I couldn't stop looking at. Not his face, not the careful, wounded expression he kept arranging every time I looked up, not even his hands, clasped together like he was the one bracing for impact. The bag, black canvas, half zipped, one sneaker sticking out at an angle, charger cord hanging from the side pocket, a toothbrush case I'd bought him last Christmas tucked into the front. He had not come home to talk. He had come home to leave. It was a Thursday. Rainy. The kind of cold evening that made the windows sweat and the apartment smell faintly like wet concrete and takeout containers. I'd gotten home from work maybe 20 minutes earlier, kicked off my heels by the door, and was still in my office blouse and slacks. My hair was pinned up, my makeup half gone, and my shoulders ached the way they always did after a long week. He was already sitting on the couch when I walked in. Levi, 26, my boyfriend of 2 years, my live-in partner for one. The man who had spent the last few months talking with me about next summer, future travel, maybe even kids one day, in that vague, nervous way people do when they want to try on forever without saying the word too loudly. And he looked like a man attending his own performance. He muted the TV the second I stepped inside. We need to talk. No one ever says that without already knowing the ending. I set my bag down slowly on the dining chair and looked at him. Then at the packed bag near the door. Then back at him. Okay. He dragged a hand down his face like this was physically painful for him. I love you, he said, but I'm not in love with you anymore. There it was. Not a crash, not a scream, not even a dramatic silence. Just a sentence dropping into the room like a knife laid flat on a table. I stood there for a second, fingers still curled around my car keys. And? I asked. He blinked, almost thrown by how calm I sounded. And I think maybe we should transition into being friends. I actually laughed once, not because it was funny, because sometimes your body refuses to choose between fury and disbelief, so it settles on a sound that means neither. Transition, I repeated. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice softening into that careful tone people use when they want credit for being gentle while doing something cruel. We get along so well. We have the same friend group, same routines, same interests. You matter to me, Naomi. I don't want to lose you completely. I stared at him. He kept going, mistaking my silence for space. I just think maybe we're better as friends than as partners. Outside, a car hissed through rain on the street below. Somewhere in the building, a door shut hard. The refrigerator hummed. My whole body felt strange and still, like I'd stepped out of myself and was watching another woman in my apartment, listening to another man dismantle her life with polished language. I looked at the bag again. You already packed. His jaw tightened. I knew this would be hard. That's not what I said. He stood then, like he needed to turn the conversation into movement so he could survive it. Ethan's coming to pick me up in an hour, he said. I'm going to stay with him for a bit while we figure out the living situation. Ethan, a friend who had offered him a place to stay. Of course. Everything inside me went cold in a new way. So this is done, I said. Not a conversation, not a rough patch, not confusion. Done. He exhaled through his nose. I didn't want it to feel brutal. I folded my arms. You came home with a packed bag, a pickup arranged, and a speech rehearsed. That's not fair. It's exactly fair. He flinched, just slightly, but enough. For a second, I saw what he'd expected. Tears, questions, maybe bargaining, maybe some version of me crumbling in a way that would let him feel wanted while he walked out. Instead, I just stood there in my damp work clothes, looking at him like a stranger in my living room. He lowered his voice. I don't want this to be ugly. That almost got me. Not because it was sad, because it was insulting. Ugly, as if heartbreak only counted if it was inconvenient for the person causing it. I took a breath. We were talking about your sister's wedding next summer, I said quietly. You asked me if I thought we'd still be in the city by then. His eyes shifted away. Things changed. When? He hesitated. That told me enough. Not tonight, not this week, maybe not even recently. He had been leaving me in his head long before he ever zipped that bag. I nodded once, more to myself than to him. And now you want friendship. He stepped closer, relief flickering in his expression because he thought I was finally moving toward acceptance. I do. I really do. I care about you. I just need space to figure out who I am outside of us. There it was. The polished excuse. The modern, clean version of abandonment. Not cheating, not cruelty, not betrayal. Just growth, discovery, selfhood. Language that made him sound brave instead of selfish. I tilted my head. So let me get this straight. You want to end the relationship but keep me in your life. He frowned. When you say it like that, it sounds bad. It sounds accurate. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. I walked past him into the kitchen because if I stayed standing that close, I might say something sharp enough to split the room in half. I braced my palms against the counter and looked at the dark reflection in the window over the sink. My face looked composed. Too composed. I remembered Sunday mornings with him making coffee shirtless, his hair still messy from sleep. I remembered buying the ridiculous ceramic bowl he liked because he ate cereal out of a mixing bowl like a child. I remembered helping him edit his resume, sitting with him in urgent care when he cut his palm on a broken glass, the way he used to reach for my hand automatically in parking lots. 2 years of little things. And here he was, trying to reduce all of that into a softer category so he wouldn't have to feel like the villain. He came into the kitchen behind me. Naomi! I turned around, and I don't know if it was pride or pain or just the sudden need not to let him leave with the comfort of my devastation. But what came out of my mouth surprised even me. Okay. He blinked. What? Okay, I said again, steadier this time. You're right. We should be able to make this work as adults. For one stunned second, he just stared. Then his entire body loosened. Relief, immediate, visible, ugly in its own way. Oh my God, he breathed. Thank you. I was so worried you'd hate me or make this difficult. I looked at him and thought, that's the part you were afraid of. Not hurting me, difficulty. This is why I think we can be friends, he said, smiling now, tentative but hopeful. You're so mature. You always handle things better than anyone I know. I almost said, no, Levi, I'm just learning very quickly. Instead, I gave him a small nod. Yeah, I said, friends. He came closer like he wanted to hug me, and I stepped back just enough for him to notice. Something flickered in his face then. Confusion, maybe. A small discomfort. As if friendship already felt different when it wasn't wrapped in his preferred version of access. His phone buzzed. He checked it and said, Ethan's downstairs. Of course he was. Levi picked up the bag. The apartment looked different with it gone. Not emptier, just rearranged. Like a room after movers have taken out the biggest piece and left dents in the carpet where something heavy used to be. At the door, he paused. We'll figure out the apartment stuff soon, he said. There's no rush. No rush. I wondered if he'd hear how absurd that sounded if I repeated it back to him. You end a life with someone in 12 minutes, but the logistics can take their time. We'll sort it out, I said. He gave me one last searching look, maybe still waiting for the delayed breakdown, some proof that I loved him enough to hurt visibly. I gave him nothing. When the door closed, the silence hit in layers. First, the absence of him, then the absence of movement, then the slow, brutal reality that no one was coming back upstairs to say this had all been handled badly. I stood in the middle of the living room for a long time. Then I did something stupid. I picked up one of his mugs from the coffee table, the blue one with the chipped handle, the one he refused to throw away because he said it still worked. I stared at the faint crescent of dried coffee on the inside and thought, this is what people mean when they say heartbreak is embarrassing. Not the crying, not the begging, the ordinary things that survive the conversation. I set the mug in the sink, washed my face, changed into an old t-shirt, crawled into bed alone. I didn't sleep much. At 7:02 the next morning, my phone lit up. Levi. Hey, hope you slept okay. I think I left my work laptop there in the rush. Any chance you could bring it to Ethan's today? I need it this weekend. I stared at the screen. There it was. The first test. Not of love, of access. I typed back carefully. Me. Sure. I can leave it at the front desk of your office on Monday. The dots appeared almost instantly. Levi. Monday? I kind of need it before then. Could you just swing by Ethan's? It'll only take a second. I looked around the bedroom, at the closet door still open from the night before, at the empty space where some of his jackets used to hang, at the pillow beside mine that still held the shape of a head, no longer entitled to be there. Then I looked back at the phone. Me. Monday works better for me. A pause. Levi. You have plans? I could almost hear the confusion in that question. Confusion and something else. A tiny bruise to expectation. I answered with the truth he had asked for. Me. Yes, friend plans. That was when I knew. He had said friendship because he thought it would soften the exit. I was about to show him what friendship actually looked like. By the second week, I understood something with painful clarity. Levi had not asked for friendship because he wanted a real friendship. He had asked for friendship because he wanted a softer version of the relationship he had just walked away from. He wanted emotional comfort without obligation. He wanted access without responsibility. He wanted to leave me while still being able to reach back into my life whenever it suited him. The first few days made that obvious. He texted like nothing fundamental had changed. Not constantly, but casually enough to test the edges. He sent a photo of a terrible sandwich Ethan had made and wrote, "I miss actual food." He sent a reel about some crime documentary we had both been planning to watch and wrote, "This is so us." He even sent a picture of a dog in a tiny raincoat because I had once told him that dogs in raincoats could fix almost any bad mood. I responded politely, but not intimately. I did not flirt. I did not soften my tone. I did not fill in silence the way I used to. I answered the way I answer friends, warm enough to be civil, brief enough to be clear. That was the first thing he did not like. The second came on Tuesday. I got home from work just after 6 with grocery bags cutting into my fingers and a headache pressing behind my eyes. The apartment building lobby smelled like wet umbrellas and floor cleaner. By the time I reached my floor, I was already thinking about changing into pajamas, microwaving leftovers, and pretending my life did not feel like it had been split open with a kitchen knife. I unlocked the door, pushed it open with my shoulder, and stopped. The apartment lights were on. For one sharp second, my whole body went tense. Then I saw the note on the counter. Borrowed a few things. Did laundry. Hope that is okay. Levi. I stood there staring at the handwriting. The washing machine was still warm when I touched it. A damp towel hung over the back of one of the dining chairs. The bathroom mirror had been wiped in the careless, streaky way Levi always cleaned it. Half a carton of orange juice was missing from the fridge. One of my good bath towels was gone from the linen closet. He had not just stopped by. He had let himself in and acted like the apartment was still partly his because in his mind, it was. I put the grocery bags down slowly and looked around the living room. Nothing huge was missing. Nothing dramatic had happened. That almost made it worse. It was ordinary, familiar, presumptuous in exactly the way only someone who still believed he belonged here could be. I took out my phone and texted him. "Hey, I saw your note. I need my key back." He replied less than a minute later. "What? Why?" I stared at the screen and laughed once under my breath. Not because it was funny, because it was so perfectly him. "Because we broke up," I typed. Another instant reply. "I still have stuff there. You can come get your things. We can schedule a time." "Naomi, seriously?" "Yes, seriously." He called right away. I let it ring twice before I answered. His voice came in already tight with irritation. "You are being ridiculous." I shut the fridge with my hip. "No, I am being clear. I lived here. You used to. That is not the point." "It is exactly the point." He exhaled sharply, and I could picture him running a hand through his hair the way he always did when he thought I was being stubborn instead of simply refusing to let him set the rules. "I needed a few things. I was not trying to start a fight. You came into my home while I was at work, did your laundry, used my groceries, and left a note like that covered everything." "Our home." "No, not anymore." Silence. Then he changed tactics like I knew he would. "Wow, so this is what friendship looks like to you." I leaned against the kitchen counter and looked at the note again. "Yes," I said calmly. "Actually, it is." He scoffed. "Friends do not act like this." "My friends do not have keys to my apartment." He was quiet for a second. Then his tone sharpened. "You know that is different." "Why?" "Because of our history." I almost admired the honesty of that answer. He did know it was different. He just did not want to say the rest out loud. He wanted the privileges of history without the obligations of the present. "Our history is exactly why there need to be boundaries now," I said. "This feels petty. This feels adult." He hung up on me. I should say that getting to this version of myself was not effortless. I was not floating through the breakup on some elegant wave of self-respect, untouched by grief. I still woke up reaching for the other side of the bed before remembering. I still had moments in the grocery store where I picked up something Levi liked out of habit and then stood there staring at it like an idiot before putting it back. I still had to fight the urge to tell him things when something funny happened or when I saw a trailer for a movie he would have loved. But pain and clarity are not opposites. Sometimes they arrive together. By 8 that night, he was knocking on my door. Not gently. I opened it to find him standing there in a gray hoodie, jaw tight, eyes bright with indignation. He looked tired, but not wounded. He looked inconvenienced. "Where is it?" he asked. I crossed my arms. "Where is what?" "My key." I held it up between 2 fingers. His gaze dropped to it, then rose back to my face. "You really changed the locks?" "I had them rekeyed." "That is insane." "No, it is practical." "I cannot believe you are doing this." I looked at him for a second. "You ended the relationship, Levi. That does not mean I am a threat." "I did not say you were." "Then why are you acting like this?" "Because I finally understood that if I did not define the boundary, he would erase it every single time. because he had mistaken my calm for softness, because people who leave often still expect to feel loved in the exact ways they abandoned, because part of me still loved him. And that was exactly why I needed the lock changed before nostalgia started making decisions that pain should not be allowed to make. But I did not say any of that. I said, because you do not live here anymore. He stared at me. The hallway light caught the hard line of his mouth. Someone down the hall opened their door, glanced at us, then disappeared again. Levi lowered his voice a little, probably realizing he had lost the right to make a scene on this side of the threshold. You are overreacting. I shook my head. No, I am adjusting. He laughed under his breath, but there was no humor in it. You know what your problem is? You are taking this way too literally. That sentence landed between us, and I felt something cold settle into place. Too literally. There it was. He had not wanted honesty. He had wanted interpretation. He had wanted me to understand the emotional fine print he had not spoken aloud. He had wanted me to hear, let's be friends, and somehow translate it into, stay available, stay gentle, stay half mine until I decide what else is out there. I looked him directly in the eyes. I am taking you exactly at your word. His face changed then. It was subtle, but I saw it. The frustration gave way to something more unsettled, something that looked a lot like the first real flicker of panic. Because for the first time, he understood that I was not going to play the role he had assigned me in his head. He held out his hand. Give me the key. I placed it in his palm. Then I handed him a small cardboard box I had set by the entry table earlier. He looked down at it. What is this? Your immediate stuff. My immediate stuff? The rest can be sorted out later, with notice. His expression hardened. You packed my things? I packed some of them. That is unbelievable. What would have been unbelievable, I said, would have been me pretending none of this changed anything. His fingers tightened around the box. You are angry. Yes. He blinked, as if the honesty surprised him more than the boundary. I went on before he could speak. I am angry, Levi. I am hurt. I am disappointed. But none of that changes the situation. You broke up with me. You left. You asked for friendship. This is what it looks like. He swallowed. No, this is what cold looks like. I should have denied it. Maybe the old version of me would have. The version that still wanted to be seen as kind, reasonable, easy to love. But I was too tired for performance. No, I said. This is what distance looks like. His eyes held mine for a few long seconds. Then he looked away first. That mattered more than I wanted to admit. He took the box and stepped back. This is not how normal people handle breakups. I almost smiled. You are right. Most people do not ask to keep boyfriend privileges after ending the relationship. His head snapped back toward me. That is not what I am doing. Then stop acting surprised. For a second, I thought he might argue more. Instead, he just stood there looking at me like I had turned into someone else while he was not paying attention. Maybe I had. He left without saying goodbye. I closed the door and locked it, then stood there with my hand still on the knob while the apartment settled around me. I did cry that night. Not because he had yelled, not because I regretted anything. I cried because boundaries are lonelier than hope, at least in the beginning. Hope lets you imagine someone might come back different. Boundaries force you to accept who they already are. Still, I slept better than I had the night he left. The next morning, I opened my laptop to find that Levi had tried to sign into my streaming account 3 times after midnight. By lunch, he texted asking if I had changed the password by accident. By evening, he wanted to know whether I was keeping him on the shared Prime account because he still had a few packages coming. I removed his profile from Netflix. I changed the password on Prime. I called the phone company and asked what it would take to separate our plan before the next billing cycle. Every practical step made me feel strangely steadier. Every practical step seemed to make him more unsettled. By Friday, he was testing a different angle. He texted me just after 5. A bunch of us are doing game night tomorrow. You coming? I stared at the message for a second. Before the breakup, that text would have sounded normal, comfortable, us. We always went to group game nights together. We had our usual snacks, inside jokes, and unspoken roles. Levi always read instructions badly on purpose just to annoy everyone. I always ended up keeping score because no one else could be trusted to do it right. He would sit too close to me on the couch, stealing fries from my plate and pretending he had not. Now the text looked different. Not like an invitation. Like a test. I typed back. Sure, sounds fun. His reply came almost immediately. Cool, see you there. No heart, no smile, no softness. Good. I set the phone down and went back to folding laundry. One of his old t-shirts was still mixed in with mine from before he moved out. I held it for a second, then added it to the pile for the next box. Saturday night arrived cold and clear. I took extra time getting ready, not because of Levi, but because I wanted to feel like myself again. I wore dark jeans, a fitted black sweater, gold hoops, and enough makeup to make me look more rested than I felt. By the time I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror on my way out, I looked composed, sharp, untouchable, even. That was new. Game night was at our friend Ben's place. The apartment was already loud when I arrived. Music low in the background. People talking over each other. A bowl of chips on the coffee table. 2 open pizza boxes in the kitchen. The smell of beer and garlic knots in the air. And then I saw Levi. He was standing near the couch with a woman I had never seen before. She was pretty in a polished, intentional way. Glossy hair, matching workout set under an oversized coat, a face that suggested she knew she was being looked at and had no objection to it. Levi smiled when he saw me, but it was the kind of smile people wear when they are waiting to see whether their move lands. "Naomi," he said. "Hey." "Hey." He turned to the woman beside him. "This is Chloe. We met through a friend." Chloe smiled and reached out a hand. "Nice to meet you." I shook it. "You too." Levi kept his eyes on me a second longer than necessary, clearly waiting for something. A flinch, a crack, a shadow of jealousy. He got nothing. I smiled at Chloe, asked how she knew the group, and moved past them into the kitchen to grab a drink. Behind me, the room kept moving. Conversation, laughter, cards shuffling, someone arguing about rules. I opened a soda, leaned against the counter, and felt it happen. Not healing, not yet, but power shifting. He had brought a woman there to see whether I would still bleed on command. Instead, I had shown up looking like someone who already understood the trick. I stayed in the kitchen for a minute longer than I needed to. Not because I was shaken, because I wanted the extra second to look at the room clearly and make sure I was not imagining what had just happened. Levi had absolutely brought Chloe there on purpose. Not because he liked her. Maybe he did. Maybe he did not. That part barely mattered. What mattered was the timing, the introduction, and the way he had watched my face as he said her name. He wanted confirmation that he still had emotional access to me. He wanted proof that no matter what he called us now, I was still standing exactly where he had left me. I took a sip of soda and let the cold settle on my tongue. Then I walked back out like none of it had landed. That, more than anything, seemed to throw him. The game started a few minutes later. It was one of those messy group nights where nobody fully committed to one thing. So half the room wanted charades, 3 people wanted a murder mystery card game, and Ben kept trying to force everyone into code names because he had just bought a new version and wanted validation. I ended up on the far side of the coffee table between Ben and Marcus. Marcus, Levi's best friend for years. The same one who had helped him move out that night. The same one I had only ever known in the context of him. He was sharp, funny, a little chaotic, always dressed like he had thrown something on carelessly, even though it somehow worked perfectly. Before all this, he had always been around, but never close enough for me to see him clearly as his own person. That night I started to. He looked over as I sat down and smiled. "You look good." I laughed softly. That sounded more surprised than complimentary. He put a hand to his chest in mock offense. "No, I mean it. You look really good." "Thank you." His eyes flicked briefly toward Levi and then back to me. "Black is your color." I glanced down at my sweater. I wore the safest thing I own. Sometimes safe works. There was something easy about talking to him that night. Not openly flirtatious. Not yet. Just easy. Which was a relief, because almost everything else in the room had a layer of friction under it. Levi stayed close to Chloe in a way that felt just visible enough to be deliberate. His hand brushed the small of her back when she moved past him. He leaned in too close when she said something. He laughed a little too loudly at things that were not funny. It would have been embarrassing if it were not so transparent. At one point, Jake looked around the room and muttered, "This is tense enough to qualify as a hostage situation." I snorted into my drink. Ben threw a pillow at him, then stopped making it worse. But the tension was not coming from me. That was the interesting part. I was fine. Not untouched, not numb, not magically healed, but fine. I could sit in the same room as my ex and the woman he had brought to provoke me and still feel the ground under my own feet. That mattered, because Levi kept glancing at me like he was waiting for some delayed reaction that never arrived. Halfway through the second round of code names, Chloe excused herself to take a call. Levi stood a second later and disappeared down the hallway toward the bathroom. I was still studying the word grid when Ben said, "Naomi, kitchen mission. We are out of ice." Tragic, I said. I'll alert the authorities. I stood up, took the empty ice bucket, and headed into the kitchen. Levi was already there. Of course he was. He was standing by the counter with the freezer drawer open, like he had suddenly developed a passionate interest in frozen water. He looked back when I walked in, and I saw it immediately in his face. He had been waiting for a moment alone. I set the bucket down. You can have the honors, I said. He shut the freezer and turned toward me. You are really okay with this? I looked at him. With ice? His jaw tightened. You know what I mean. I opened the drawer myself and started scooping. Not especially, no. With Chloe. I shrugged one shoulder. Why wouldn't I be? He gave a short, disbelieving laugh. Come on, Naomi. I dropped 2 cubes into the bucket and met his eyes. We are friends, right? His expression shifted, not quite irritation, not quite confusion. That is not the point. It actually is. He took a step closer. Not enough to crowd me, just enough to remind me he was still trying to push emotional space into physical space and see what that bought him. You seriously do not care? There was something almost boyish in the question, which would have been sad if it were not so selfish. He did not mean, are you hurt? He meant, do I still have the power to hurt you in a way that reassures me? I answered honestly. I care that you ended a 2-year relationship like it was a scheduling conflict, I said. I care that you asked for friendship when what you really wanted was convenience. But no, I do not care that you brought a date to game night. She is not a date. That almost made me smile. Oh, so now labels matter? His mouth flattened. I tipped the ice into the bucket. Friends date people, Levi, or they do not. Either way, it is not really my business. He stared at me. You are being cold again. I set the scoop down with more care than necessary. No, I am being accurate. He leaned his hands against the counter on either side of him and lowered his voice. You know, it is weird. What is? How fast you switched off. I looked at him for a long second. That annoyed me more than the Chloe performance had, because that was how he was framing it in his head. As if he had abandoned me with thoughtful wording, and now the truly suspicious thing was that I was not making his transition harder. As if my ability to recover some dignity meant my love had never been real enough. I folded my arms. Do you want me to be honest? His eyes narrowed slightly. Aren't you always? Not always. I was nicer before. That landed. I saw it in the way his shoulders shifted. Then I went on. You do not miss me grieving. You miss being sure I still belong to you. He actually looked offended. That is not fair. It is exactly fair. His gaze dropped to the floor for half a second before returning to me. I never said you belonged to me. You didn't have to. He straightened. Something in the room tightened. The refrigerator hummed. Voices carried faintly from the living room. Somebody laughed too loudly. In the middle of all that ordinary noise, the two of us stood there looking at each other like a sentence had finally reached its real ending. Then he said it. You are not even a little jealous? I tilted my head. Are you jealous when your other friends date people? He opened his mouth and closed it again. There it was. The problem in one clean line. Because no. Of course he was not jealous when his other friends dated people. He was not possessive of them. He did not expect devotion from them. He did not need them to pause their lives to preserve his comfort. But he wanted all of that from me. He just did not want to call it what it was. I picked up the ice bucket. That is what I thought. I started to walk past him, and his hand moved on instinct, catching lightly at my wrist. Not hard, not aggressive, just familiar. My body reacted before my mind did. I stopped and looked down at his fingers. He let go immediately. Sorry, he said. I nodded once and kept walking. When I got back into the living room, Marcus looked up from the couch. You were gone long enough for me to assume a kitchen murder, he said. Only attempted murder, I replied, setting the bucket down. He laughed. A real laugh, easy, bright, unforced. For the rest of the night, he kept ending up near me. At first I thought it was random. Then I realized it was not. He passed me a drink before I asked. He leaned in to make side comments during the game. He laughed at my jokes a little longer than necessary. Once, when Jake made some dramatic speech about loyalty and friendship after losing another round, Marcus looked at me and muttered, Some people only love loyalty when it benefits them. I glanced at him. That sounded loaded. It was loaded. His tone was light, but there was something underneath it. Awareness, maybe. Or judgment he was no longer trying very hard to hide. Levi noticed it too. I could tell by the way his eyes kept tracking us. Not constantly, just enough. Not enough for anyone else to clock it unless they were looking for it. I was. At one point, Marcus touched my arm while he was laughing at something I said, and I felt it like a tiny shift in the room. Not because the touch itself was intimate, because Levi saw it. His whole posture changed. He was by the couch with Chloe, but his attention snapped across the room so sharply it was almost visible. Chloe noticed. Her smile dimmed for half a second before she followed his line of sight and saw exactly what had pulled him away from her. That was the moment I understood something else. He had not only expected me to stay emotionally available, he had assumed the people around him would stay in their assigned places too. His best friend would remain his best friend. I would remain his soft landing. The group dynamic would bend around his choices and then settle back into shape. But real life does not work like that. Once a crack runs through something, everything around it shifts. Later, while Ben and Jake argued over whether a made-up rule had always existed or had just been invented to protect Jake's ego, Marcus flopped down beside me on the couch with a bowl of chips balanced on one knee. "I forgot how funny you are when you are not exhausted," he said. I gave him a look. "That is both rude and probably true." He grinned. "You always seemed a little tired before." "I was dating your best friend." That slipped out before I could stop it. For half a second, I expected awkwardness. Instead, Marcus barked out a laugh so sudden he almost dropped the chips. That might be the most honest thing anyone has said tonight. I smiled despite myself. Then his expression softened. "I am sorry," he said quietly. I looked at him. For what? For how he handled it. There was no performance in his face, no careful neutrality. He meant it. I looked down at the cards scattered across the coffee table. "You do not have to apologize for him." "No," he said, "but I can still think he was a coward." That surprised me. Not because I thought he was incapable of seeing it, because up until then, I had assumed anyone that close to Levi would be reflexively on his side, or at least eager to avoid calling anything by its real name. I should have known better. Friend groups are like families. Everybody knows more than they say. The night started winding down around 11. Chloe left first, claiming an early morning workout class. Levi walked her out, but the goodbye felt off even from across the room. Too formal, too brief. Like whatever point he had wanted to make by bringing her had dissolved somewhere between the kitchen conversation and the sight of Marcus sitting close enough to my shoulder that our sleeves kept brushing. When he came back inside, he did not look at me right away. He looked at Marcus. Just for a second. But it was enough. Marcus looked right back at him with a calm expression that said he knew exactly what Levi was thinking and had no intention of making it easier for him. Interesting. By the time I grabbed my coat, only a handful of people were left. Jake had started stacking empty cans. Ben was pretending not to yawn. Marcus stood near the door, scrolling through his phone. Levi was in the kitchen again, talking quietly to Ben. I slipped my arms into my coat and reached for my bag. "Heading out?" Marcus asked. "Yeah, I turn into a pumpkin after 11 now." "That is deeply disappointing. I was just starting to enjoy myself." I laughed softly. "Then your standards are lower than I thought." "They are getting worse by the minute." He slid his phone into his pocket and stepped a little closer. "Do you want me to walk you down?" It was such a simple question that it should not have felt charged. But it did. Not because of him. Because I could feel Levi noticing from across the room. I kept my tone light. "I know how elevators work, but thanks." "Rude," he said. "I was being nice." "Were you?" He smiled. And there it was again. Not overt, not reckless. Just a thread of something beginning. Maybe I would have stepped away from it if he had been anybody else. Maybe I would have protected the old geometry of the group out of habit or caution or basic common sense. But the truth was, I was tired of shaping myself around Levi's comfort. I was tired of acting like my life had to stay still so his choices did not feel messy. And Marcus was not flirting to play a game. At least it did not feel that way. He seemed curious, amused, deliberate in a way that suggested he had already made up his mind about something. I looked at him for a second too long. Then I said, "You can walk me down if you promise not to narrate the elevator ride." "I make no such promises." We headed toward the door together. As we passed the kitchen, Levi looked up. His eyes moved from me to Marcus and back again. No expression at first, then one, small, tight, controlled badly enough that I knew he had not meant to show it. Jealousy, sharp and immediate. And for the first time since he sat me down on that couch and told me he wanted to transition into friendship, I saw him clearly understand what that word really meant when it was applied both ways. Outside, the hallway was quiet. The elevator took forever, like it always did. We stood side by side under the dim yellow light, close enough to smell detergent and cologne and the faint cold air that still clung to our coats. Marcus leaned against the wall. "He is losing his mind, by the way." I looked at him. "That sounds like a him problem." "It definitely is." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and we stepped inside. He pressed the lobby button, then glanced at me with a half smile. "I mean it, though. You handled tonight better than I would have." I folded my arms loosely. I am running mostly on pride and caffeine. Still counts. The elevator descended. I could feel the weirdness of the moment, but it did not feel wrong. It felt new, unscripted, a little dangerous in the way any honest thing feels dangerous when everyone around you is used to pretending. At the lobby, the doors opened again. We stepped out and I turned toward the entrance. Thanks for walking me down. Anytime. I started toward the doors, and then he said my name. I looked back. His expression had shifted, still warm, but more serious now. Hey, he said, just so you know, you are not crazy. The words landed harder than I expected, because breakups like this do something ugly to your head, especially the gentle ones. The ones dressed up in language about growth and maturity and friendship. They make you question your own hurt, make you wonder whether you are being dramatic for noticing the selfishness under the softness. I held his gaze. Thank you, I said quietly. He nodded once. Then I walked out into the cold. By the time I got home, my phone had one new message. Levi. Of course. I stood in my kitchen under the muted light above the stove and opened it. What was that with you and Marcus tonight? I read it once, then again. Not because it was confusing, because it was so revealing. No mention of Chloe. No mention of the kitchen conversation. No mention of anything except the one thing that had finally unsettled him. I typed back. What was what? His reply came fast. You know what I mean. I leaned against the counter. We were talking. He started typing immediately. It was flirty. I looked at that sentence for a long moment. Then I smiled. Because now we were finally in honest territory. Not morally honest, not emotionally mature, but honest enough. He had wanted me calm, available, and alone. What he could not tolerate was the possibility that I might become unavailable to him in a way he had not chosen. I typed carefully. He is your friend. And I am your friend too, right? Friends can talk to each other. The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then nothing. No answer, no argument, no explanation. Just silence. I set my phone down on the counter and stared out at the dark city beyond the window. My reflection looked back at me, tired but steady. Somewhere between his packed bag and that unanswered text, the center of gravity had moved. Not all at once, not cleanly, but enough. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The silence from Levi lasted 3 days. Not the kind of silence that feels peaceful. The kind that feels like someone is holding their breath, waiting for you to break first. I didn't. I went to work. I answered emails. I made coffee in the morning and stopped making too much out of habit. I reorganized my closet just to have something physical to do with my hands. I boxed up more of his things, neatly, deliberately, like I was filing away a chapter instead of erasing it. And then Thursday night, my phone lit up. Not Levi. Marcus. Hey, this is random, but I have an extra ticket to a comedy show Saturday. You interested? I stared at the message longer than I expected to. Not because I didn't understand it, because I understood it perfectly. There was no confusion in his tone, no vague group invite, no "a few people are going" buffer. It was direct, clear, intentional. A one-on-one. I leaned back against the couch, phone in my hand, and let myself think for a second. This was complicated. Not morally. That part was actually simple. Levi and I were not together. He had made that decision. He had walked out. He had asked for friendship. He had even brought another woman to game night like it was some kind of performance. But socially, emotionally, historically, this was his best friend. And I could already hear the version of the story he would tell in his head. That I moved fast. That I was trying to hurt him. That I had been waiting for an excuse. All of it wrong. All of it predictable. The real question was simpler. Did I want to go? I thought about the kitchen conversation, about the way Marcus had looked at me, not like I was fragile or inconvenient, but like I was someone worth paying attention to. I thought about the elevator, the way he had said, "You're not crazy," like he understood exactly what had just happened without me having to explain it. And I thought about Levi, about the bag by the door, about the word transition, about the expectation that I would stay quietly orbiting him while he figured out his life. I looked back down at my phone. Me, sure, sounds fun. The reply came almost instantly. Marcus, great, I'll pick you up at 7. Me, works for me. There was a pause. Then another message. Marcus, just a heads up. Levi's being weird about us talking. I let out a quiet breath. Of course he was. Me, noted. Another pause. Marcus, still okay? I smiled slightly. Me, still okay. That was the moment the line fully crossed. Not in some dramatic, reckless way. Just a decision. Clear, quiet. Mine. Saturday came faster than I expected. I spent too long getting ready. Not because I was nervous about Marcus. Because it had been 2 years since I had been on a real date. that wasn't just an extension of an existing relationship. 2 years since I had looked in the mirror and thought about how I wanted to be seen by someone new. That feeling was strange. Not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. I ended up in a dark green dress, simple but fitted, something that made me feel like myself without trying too hard. My hair down, soft waves, minimal jewelry, enough makeup to feel put together, not performative. When I stepped back and looked at myself, I didn't see someone trying to prove anything. I saw someone starting over. At exactly 7:02, my phone buzzed. I'm outside. I grabbed my coat, checked my reflection one last time out of habit, and headed down. Marcus was leaning against his car when I stepped out of the building. Dark jeans, a charcoal jacket, sleeves pushed up at the forearms, expression easy. He straightened when he saw me, and for a second, he just looked at me. Then he smiled. "Okay," he said, "you clean up really well." I laughed softly. I was about to say the same thing. "Liar, I always look like this." "That's impressive." He opened the passenger door for me with a small, exaggerated gesture. "After you." The drive was easy. No heavy conversations. No awkward pauses. Music low in the background. City lights passing in streaks through the windows. He asked about my week. I asked about his. We avoided Levi without it feeling forced, which somehow made everything feel lighter. At one point, he glanced over at me and said, "You seem different." I raised an eyebrow. "That's a dangerous statement." "In a good way," he added quickly. "More settled, maybe." I looked out the window for a second. "I think I just stopped trying to make something work that wasn't working." He nodded slowly. "That'll do it." The comedy show was packed. Dim lights, crowded tables, the hum of conversation layered over the clink of glasses, and the occasional burst of laughter from the stage. We found our seats, ordered drinks, and settled in. And for the first time in weeks, I forgot. Not everything, not completely, but enough. I laughed. Real laughter, the kind that catches you off guard and makes your shoulders relax. Marcus leaned into it too, quick with comments under his breath, reacting in a way that made the whole thing feel shared instead of observed. At some point, our knees brushed under the table. Neither of us moved right away. It wasn't a big moment, but it wasn't nothing either. Later, during a slower set, he turned slightly toward me. "I'm glad you said yes." I met his eyes. "Me too." There was a pause. Not awkward. "Just present." Then he smiled, lighter again, and turned back toward the stage. "We didn't talk about Levi. Not once. And that mattered more than anything else. Because this didn't feel like revenge. It didn't feel like a statement. It felt like two people choosing to be in the same place at the same time without dragging someone else into the center of it. By the time the show ended, the night had shifted into something softer. Quieter. We walked back to the car under cold air and streetlights, the city buzzing around us in that late-night way where everything feels slightly removed from real life. Halfway there, he said, "I should probably warn you." "That sounds ominous." "Levi's definitely losing it." I huffed a quiet laugh. "That's consistent." "He called me earlier," he went on, asking if we were hanging out. Not asking, actually, more like trying to catch me in something. I shook my head. "Of course he did." He glanced at me. "Does that bother you?" I thought about it. About the question underneath the question. "No," I said honestly. "It just confirms what I already knew." "Which is?" "That he didn't really want friendship." He smiled slightly. "No, he wanted control." I looked at him. "You said that very easily." "I've known him a long time," he said. "Long enough to know the difference." We reached the car. For a second, neither of us moved to get in. The air felt colder now, quieter, more intentional. He leaned back lightly against the door, watching me. "So," he said, softer now, "was this a terrible idea?" I shook my head. "No." "Good." Another pause. Then he stepped a little closer. Not enough to crowd me. Just enough to close the space that had been hovering between us all night. I could feel my heartbeat shift. "Not fast, just aware." "You're sure?" he asked. I held his gaze. "I'm sure." That was all it took. He kissed me. Soft, careful, not rushed, not forced, just enough to test whether the moment was real. It was. I kissed him back. Not because of Levi, not because of the situation, because I wanted to. When we pulled apart, he smiled, but there was something steadier behind it now. "Okay," he said quietly. "Good to know." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Yeah." The drive back was quieter. Not awkward, just full. When he pulled up outside my building, neither of us rushed the goodbye. "Text me when you're inside," he said. "I will." I stepped out, closed the door, and turned back once before heading inside. He was still there, watching. One hand on the steering wheel, expression unreadable but calm. I went upstairs, unlocked the door, stepped into my apartment. And for a moment, everything felt still again. Then my phone exploded. Call after call. Levi. I stared at the screen as it lit up again and again. 17 missed calls. A message came through right after. Are you serious right now? I exhaled slowly, then typed back. About what? The reply came instantly. Marcus told me you went out with him. I leaned against the door, still in my coat. He invited me to a comedy show. 3 dots. Then, you can't do that. I closed my eyes for a second, then opened them. Why not? Because he's my best friend. There it was. Not concern, not confusion. Ownership. I typed carefully. I thought I was your friend now. Silence. Then, you know what I mean. I really didn't. And for the first time, I wasn't interested in pretending that I did. Friends don't get to control who their friends date. The typing bubble appeared, stayed, disappeared, came back. Then finally, this isn't how friends act. I looked at the message for a long moment. Then I smiled, because now everything was exactly where it needed to be. This is exactly how friends act. You're thinking of how boyfriends act. Common mistake. I hit send. And this time, when the silence came back, it felt different. Not tense, not waiting. Final. Levi didn't respond that night. But silence, I was starting to understand, didn't mean acceptance. It meant escalation was coming. By Monday morning, I felt it before I even saw it. 3 missed calls from Jake, 2 from Ben, 1 message from a number I didn't recognize, and Levi's name sitting at the top of my notifications like a warning sign I already knew how to read. I called Jake back first. He picked up immediately. Okay, what the hell is going on? I leaned against my desk, eyes closing briefly. That depends. What version did you hear? A pause. Then, carefully, Levi says you're dating Marcus to get back at him. Of course he did. I let out a quiet breath. Did he also mention that he broke up with me, asked to be friends, and then showed up to game night with another woman? Jake hesitated. He did not lead with that. Shocking. There was a beat of silence. Then Jake exhaled. Yeah, okay, that tracks. I'm not dating anyone to get back at him, I said. I went on one date with someone who asked me out. That's it. And that someone just happens to be his best friend. Yes. Another pause. Then, quieter. That's messy, Naomi. I didn't disagree. It is, I said. But messy doesn't mean wrong. Jake didn't argue that. All right, he said finally. Just be careful. He's not handling this well. I noticed. When I hung up, I sat there for a second, staring at nothing. This was the part I had expected. Not the specifics, but the pattern. When people lose control of a situation, they try to control the narrative. And Levi was already rewriting the story in a way that made him the one being wronged. By lunchtime, it got worse. Ben texted me. Levi told Chloe you were obsessed with him and trying to make him jealous. I actually laughed out loud at that. Obsessed. That word felt almost surreal considering how carefully I had been pulling my life away from his. I typed back. Interesting interpretation. Ben replied with a single line. Just telling you what he's saying. I appreciated that more than I said, because not everyone would have. Some people prefer the cleaner version of a story, the one with a clear villain, the one that doesn't force them to sit in the discomfort of 2 realities existing at the same time. By mid-afternoon, my phone buzzed again. Levi. Of course. I let it ring once before answering. What? His voice came in sharp. You're really doing this? Doing what? Don't play dumb, Naomi. I leaned back in my chair. Then don't ask vague questions. A breath on the other end. Controlled badly. You and Marcus. What about us? You went out with him. Yes. And you don't see a problem with that? No. Silence. Then, slower, like he was trying to force the words into something reasonable. He's my best friend. I'm aware. You don't date your friend's ex. I tilted my head slightly. Then you probably shouldn't have made me your ex. That landed hard. I could hear it in the way his breathing changed. That's not, he started, then stopped. Because there was no clean way to finish that sentence without admitting the contradiction. He tried again. You're doing this to hurt me. I almost felt tired hearing it. No, I said, I'm living my life. With him. Yes. That's not a coincidence. No, I agreed calmly. It's not. Another silence. Then, sharper, so you admit it. I admit that he asked me out, and I said yes. That's not how this works. It is for me. His voice dropped. You're being vindictive. There it was. The word he needed to believe. Because if I was vindictive, then he wasn't responsible for how this felt. It wasn't a consequence. It was an attack. I didn't go looking for this, I said. You left. You asked for friendship. I gave you exactly that. You're twisting this. No, I said quietly. I'm not. He didn't respond. For a second, I thought he might hang up. Then he said, softer now, almost pleading, you didn't have to move on like this. That one almost got me. Not because I agreed, because I could hear the truth buried under the entitlement. He hadn't expected me to move on at all. Not really. I closed my eyes briefly. Levi, I said, you don't get to decide how I move on from something you ended. Silence. Then, you're making a mistake. I opened my eyes. I already made the mistake, I said. I stayed in something that was already over. And then I hung up. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. That night, Marcus texted me. He sent screenshots. I opened them slowly. Levi. Message after message. What are you doing? Are you serious right now? You're choosing her over me? After everything? Then, if you do this, we're done. I stared at that line for a long moment. Done. As if he still had something to end. Marcus's message came through right after. He's losing it, I typed back. Looks like it. There was a pause. Then, I'm sorry. I didn't expect him to react like this. I leaned back against the couch. You don't have to apologize for him. Another pause. Then, still, this is a lot. I looked at the screen for a second before answering. We don't have to do anything we're not comfortable with. That mattered. Because whatever this was becoming, I wasn't going to let it turn into another situation where expectations got blurred and no one said what they actually meant. His reply came quickly. I'm comfortable. Are you? I smiled slightly. Yes. That should have settled it. It didn't, because Levi wasn't done. The next escalation came 2 nights later. At 2:07 a.m., my phone buzzed against the nightstand, dragging me out of sleep. I squinted at the screen. Levi. I almost ignored it. Almost. Then I answered. What? His voice was different, quieter, unsteady in a way that didn't match his usual controlled frustration. We need to talk. I sat up slowly. About what? A pause. Then, I think I might have made a mistake. There it was. The line I had been expecting. Just not this soon. About what? I asked again. Another pause. Us. I leaned back against the headboard, staring at the dark ceiling. Levi, I said slowly, you ended us. I know. And now? I think I rushed it. Of course he did. Not when he packed the bag. Not when he arranged the ride. Not when he sat me down and delivered his speech. Now that I wasn't waiting. Now that I wasn't available. Now that I wasn't his. I let the silence stretch just long enough for him to feel it. Then I said, that sounds like something you need to figure out. I am trying to, he said quickly. That's why I called. At 2 a.m. I couldn't sleep. I almost said neither could I, the night you left. But I didn't. Instead, I asked, what do you want from me? Another pause. Longer this time. Then, I think we should talk in person. About getting back together? I don't know, he said. I just think we owe it to ourselves to talk. There it was again. The vagueness. The lack of clarity. The open door he expected me to walk through without asking where it led. I shook my head, even though he couldn't see it. I'm not doing that. What? I'm not meeting you halfway while you figure out whether you want me. That's not what this is. It is exactly what this is. His voice tightened. You're shutting this down without even hearing me out? I already heard you, I said. You were very clear. Silence. Then, sharper now, frustration bleeding back in. Is this because of Marcus? I let out a quiet breath. No, I said. This is because of you. Another silence. Then, so that's it? I looked out into the darkness of my room. Yes, I said, and I hung up. The next day, everything shifted again. Because when someone realizes they can't pull you back emotionally, they start reaching for other ways to regain control. Levi started calling people, telling his version, sharpening it, rewriting it. And when that didn't work fast enough, he escalated. By the end of the week, Marcus called me. His voice wasn't calm this time. He showed up at my work. I sat up straighter. What? He just walked in, started talking, loud, in front of people. My stomach tightened. What did he say? That I betrayed him, that I ruined everything. That you manipulated me. I closed my eyes for a second. Of course. When did this happen? 10 minutes ago, he said. Security had to escort him out. That was the moment. Not the breakup, not the argument, not even the lies. That. Because that was the first time this stopped being contained, stopped being emotional, and started becoming something real. Something with consequences. I stood up slowly. Are you okay? I'm fine, he said, just shaken. I'm sorry. It's not your fault. I knew that, but it didn't change the weight of it. There was a pause. Then he said, quieter now, I think I might have to file something. A restraining order. The word wasn't said, but it was there. And once that line appears, everything changes. I looked out the window, the city stretching out in front of me, indifferent to all of it. Then you should, I said, because this was no longer about feelings. It was about boundaries, real ones. And Levi had just proven he didn't understand them at all. The restraining order didn't happen overnight. There were forms, statements, documentation, a quiet, methodical process that turned something chaotic into something official, something real. Marcus handled it better than I expected. Not because he wasn't shaken, because he was done. Done excusing Levi. Done minimizing him. Done pretending that what he was doing was just emotional fallout from a breakup instead of a pattern of behavior that had been there long before I ever noticed it. I should have seen it sooner, he said one night, sitting across from me with his laptop open, filling out another section of paperwork. You couldn't have, I told him. He gave me a look. I've known him for years. And that's exactly why you didn't, I said. Familiarity has a way of softening sharp edges until they don't look sharp anymore. He didn't argue with that. The order went through a few days later, temporary at first, then extended. Levi was officially not allowed to contact Marcus, not allowed near his workplace, not allowed to show up anywhere he knew Marcus would be. For the first time since this all started, there was something in place that didn't depend on emotions or interpretations. Just rules, clear ones. He didn't take it well. That part didn't surprise me. What surprised me was how quickly everything else started to fall apart around him. It turned out showing up uninvited to someone's workplace and causing a scene has consequences, not just socially, but professionally. Marcus's boss had filed a report. Security had documented the incident. There were witnesses. Levi missed work the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. By the end of the week, he didn't have a job anymore, Jake told me. We were sitting at a small bar, the kind with low lighting and quiet music where conversations feel a little more contained. He got fired, Jake said, not quite looking at me. I took a sip of my drink. I figured something like that might happen. Jake nodded. HR got involved after that stunt at Marcus's office. Plus, he'd already been missing shifts. I set my glass down slowly. There was a part of me that felt something sharp and uncomfortable at that. Not guilt, not exactly. Just the awareness that consequences, once they start, don't always stop where you expect them to. Jake watched me carefully. You okay? I'm fine, I said, and I was. Because none of this had come out of nowhere. It wasn't one bad decision, it was a series of them. And he had made every single one. Jake leaned back slightly. He's telling people you ruined his life. I let out a quiet breath. Of course he is. That's not what most people think, Jake added quickly. Just so you know. I nodded once. I know. Because people had seen enough. They had seen the breakup. They had seen the way he tried to keep access to me after ending things. They had seen the game night. They had heard the arguments. They had watched him spiral. Stories only work when they don't have too many witnesses. Levi had forgotten that. A few days later, I heard the rest. He had moved back in with his parents. The apartment with Ethan hadn't lasted. Too much tension. Too many late-night arguments. Too much anger with nowhere to go. He was in therapy now. Not by choice. As part of the legal follow-up after the workplace incident. Part-time job at a bookstore. Keeping a lower profile. Trying, from what I heard, to get back on track. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing that. I felt distance, like listening to a story about someone I used to know. The last time I heard directly from him was through an email. Not a text, not a call. An email, long, carefully written, full of the kind of language that tries to sound reflective while quietly shifting blame. I read it once. Then I read it again. I hope you're happy. That was how it started. It went on to say that I had gotten everything I wanted, that I had turned his best friend against him, that I had made him look unstable, that I had won. Won, as if this had ever been a competition, as if I had been playing a game he invented after the fact. He wrote that he had tried to let me down gently, that he had wanted to keep me in his life because he cared about me, that I had taken something simple and turned it into something destructive. He wrote that I had been vindictive, that I had forced his hand, that I had pushed things too far. I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I didn't understand what he was saying, because I understood it perfectly. This was the version of reality he needed to live with, the one where he wasn't the cause, just the victim of someone else's reaction. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say, because the truth didn't exist in that email. It existed in everything that had actually happened. He ended the relationship, he asked for friendship, he expected access, he lost it. He panicked, he escalated, he crossed lines, and then he faced consequences. None of that required me to do anything except exactly what he asked. Treat him like a friend. Nothing more, nothing less. A week later, I blocked his email, closed the last open door, and that was it. Marcus and I didn't rush into anything serious. That part mattered, because whatever this was, it hadn't started under normal circumstances. It had grown out of something messy, complicated, layered with history and tension and other people's expectations. So we took it slow. Dinner, walks, conversations that lasted longer than we planned. Laughter that came easier each time. There was no drama in it. No guessing. No trying to interpret what the other person meant behind what they said. If he wanted something, he said it. If I needed space, I took it. Simple, adult, healthy. It felt new. One night, we were sitting on my couch, legs tangled, a movie playing in the background that neither of us was really watching. He glanced at me and smiled. You know this is a ridiculous way to meet someone. I laughed softly. I've had worse. Same. There was a pause. Then he said, quieter now, I'm glad it happened, though. I looked at him. Me too. And I meant it. Not because of Levi. Not because of how everything fell apart. But because somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, I had found something I didn't even realize I had lost. Clarity. About what I deserved. About what I would accept. About what I would never negotiate again. Later that night, after he left, I stood by the window and looked out at the city. Lights stretching out in every direction. People moving through their own lives, their own stories, their own versions of right and wrong. And I thought about that first night. The bag by the door, the word transition, the careful way Levi had tried to reshape something final into something softer. I understood it better now. He hadn't been trying to protect me. He had been trying to protect himself. From guilt, from consequence, from the reality of what it means to let someone go. But letting someone go doesn't mean you get to decide how they fall. And it definitely doesn't mean you get to catch them again when you realize you made a mistake. The truth was simple. When he said, let's just be friends, I believed him. I treated him exactly like I treat my friends. With boundaries, with respect, with distance. The fact that he couldn't handle that wasn't cruelty. That was clarity. And clarity, I have learned, can feel brutal to people who were counting on confusion.